quick. Your company is about to be bought, or merged, or otherwise smashed together with a group of strangers. What's your first thought? Chances are you're not jumping up and down with glee. There may be stomping and kicking, however. Our guest today on the DesuckifyWork Podcast helps companies avoid the common pitfalls of mergers, acquisitions, and large-scale transitions. Jennifer Fondrevay is a consultant, author, and has been called the Brené Brown of M&A, with good reason. She helps leaders see the value in a people-first transition strategy, not just because it's the right thing to do, it is, but also because it's the smart thing to do if you care about the success of the transition. Did we mention that 70 to 90% of mergers and acquisitions fail? Perhaps that will wake up a few folks. When you do transitions right, they don't lead to kicking and screaming. They lead to transparency, understanding, and the ability to see new possibilities. We talk about that and so much more during the show. We had particular fun diving into the 10 personas that show up when faced with the uncertainty of a big transition. From the dominatrix to the former rock star to the know-it-all and know-nothing, you'll recognize each of them in past experiences. You may even recognize a few in yourself. And that's okay. We're all human. And if we recognize that, we're already a long way towards creating a better experience next time a big shakeup comes our way. This is Jennifer's superpower, bringing humanity into this process so we can not just survive it, but thrive in it. Sounds pretty desuckified if you ask me. But don't ask me. Ask Jennifer. She rocks. Take a listen and see for yourself. Okay. All right. Jennifer Fondrevay, welcome to the DesuckifyWork Podcast.
Let's desuckify work now.
How hard could it be?
It's getting harder.
It does feel that way.
Getting harder.
Well, speaking of desuckifying, I'd love to hear about the work you do because I think you're a part of the equation here with a lot of what you're doing. So, you want to give people a little background on what you're doing for work and maybe how you came to be doing it?
Well, the area of work that I'm trying to desuckify, which, by the way, I love that. I think Webster's, they do that word of the year.
Yeah.
And I forgot, I know they named a word last year that I was like, that's not the word. I think desuckify should have been in the running.
I'm going to have to
2023 was a really, really rough year.
It needed some desuckification. Yeah. Well, I'll have to.
I hope you're gaining listeners by the troves.
I hope so too.
Let's make 2024 better.
Yes,
so
please.
The area of work I'm looking to desuckify is the merger and acquisition part.
Okay.
Which, depending on who you are, some people might be happy they kind of took a pause in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
I think companies were distracted with so much other stuff, which I won't go into all, because we all know full well, name your distraction. And yet the mergers and acquisition piece of business is going to continue. That is not going. So it took a pause in 2023, but is going to ramp up again in 2024 because companies just, frankly, for growth strategy, it continues to be a very viable option. Companies are distressed. They can't survive on their own. They don't have a succession plan. And so they're looking to partner, merge or acquire with another company. And so yet, having been the survivor of 3 separate multi-billion-dollar M&A deals, I know that it can be a very sucky time in your career when you're going through a merger and acquisition. So I focus, it's a narrow little niche, but billions of people or billions of dollars are passed and millions of people are affected by mergers and acquisitions. So that's my area.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I think it affects people in a really powerful way when you're a part of that. And I also think, and we can get into this a little bit later, but my hunch is that a lot of the strategies that apply to mergers and acquisitions may also be relevant for people going through any kind of transition or chaotic change in the workplace. And so I think we'll dive into that too. Before we go too deep into this stuff, I always like to ask people, what is I think you kind of started to allude to this, but what is your POV on the state of work right now? Where does it fall on the suck meter?
and unfortunately pretty high.
Yeah.
And it pains me to say
Hmm.
that because, I feel like the kid who said, but I like school. I like going to, like, I was that kid. I liked
Yeah.
school. I'm a solopreneur now,
Yeah.
consultant,
Hmm.
but I actually, I was in advertising. I loved advertising.
Yeah.
To this day, am so thankful that the first 15 years of my career, I was
Hmm.
surrounded by just wacky people, right?
Yep.
Just who thought outside of the box. They didn't even know there was a box, right?
Hmm. Yep.
They just thought differently. I was in account management.
Hmm.
I got really good at selling ideas to clients because I could understand how the creative could move people,
Hmm.
and the value proposition and positioning, like all of that skill set that I now have in my M&A work,
Mm.
um, is thanks to that. So I loved advertising.
Yeah.
I talk to my friends who are still in advertising, God bless them. And it's just, and I hate this, I'm going to say it, the bean counters have kind of have taken over and sucked out the creative energy that made advertising what it was, what it is, what
Yeah.
it could be.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the conversation that I had most recently that makes me think about it is creatives, true creative, and I'm speaking to the choir on this one, right?
Yeah.
But it's about just big ideas, things that
Hmm.
people have never done.
Yep.
On the more finance side, it's about formulas and templates and
Hmm.
doing things consistently so you know what the return is. And to
Yeah.
me, those two don't meet. And so when that formula part takes over,
Hmm.
it's just made it harder to really be successful. So I applaud those companies who champion just wonderful creative ideas.
Hmm.
We need more of that. So it pains me to say that I feel like we're probably pretty high on the
Yeah.
psychometer.
Yeah.
Uh, but
Yeah.
conversations like this, I gotta give hope. So I feel like we can desuckify one
Yeah.
one little podcast at a time, as long as we're out there preaching the message.
I agree. And I definitely see and feel what you're talking about out there. I mean, my LinkedIn feed is filled with folks, particularly from the advertising world, which is my world, like just frustrated, stuck, um, disappointed,
Yeah.
that quote unquote the bean counters have taken some of the fun out of it, and not just because people want to have fun at work, but because having fun at work is how you become more creative
Right.
and come
That's
up
how
with.
you stand out.
Yeah. So
I remember a campaign that we had sold, um, and I'm not going to name names. It was a window cleaner.
okay.
It was a window cleaner. I mean, and this
Mm,
is back like in 1997, and
okay.
this whole odyssey I still remember.
Mm-hmm.
And we had done ethnography work with women who use window cleaners. And one
Mm-hmm.
of the epiphany was women loved clean windows because it let light into their life. It let light
Mm.
into their space.
Oh,
And we thought,
interesting.
this is brilliant,
Yeah.
right? We're going to do a campaign about light streaming through windows, that is
Mm-hmm.
what people really are looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And the focus groups around the storyboards, right? So it's hard to show, the power of light streaming in a
Mm-hmm.
cartoon.
Yeah. Well, they're sitting in a windowless room in
Right,
some office
right.
park.
And so the focus groups were meh
Yeah.
about it. And
Mm-hmm.
the other campaign, which was about, 3 times the amount of ammonia than the leading competitor. And so what I know to this day would have been an amazing campaign of just
Mm-hmm.
light streaming through windows and the power of light in your space.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you talk about it now in environment, work environments,
Mm-hmm.
and so to this day, and I remember I felt like the lawyer who had just lost her case for her client. I remember just sobbing with my copywriter and art
Yeah.
director being like, this we should have won.
Yeah. Oh my
I'm still
gosh.
getting teary-eyed about it.
I feel that. Yeah. I've been in many of those situations, and it's like, I think, there can be joy in knowing you put in the good fight. Like that's true. But I think when you don't feel like you've gotten the fair chance,
Right.
and I think that's maybe a little bit of what people feel out there is like there are outside factors that feel like they're impacting their ability to do their work at the
Right.
best level. And,
Yeah.
and I have to imagine that shows up in complicated ways in the M&A space where
Oh, definitely.
there's a lot of a sense of disempowerment and just a feeling of like, I don't even know what we're doing. So how do I know
Yeah.
what to do? I mean, what is your experience when you get into to these big deals and there's, like you said, just crazy numbers being thrown about, and there's a lot of attention at the top levels around, getting the minutia of those numbers just right. What is everyone else feeling during those times, and how do you help people deal with that?
Well, I focus on the people aspect of
Mm-hmm.
all of that.
Yeah.
So my my role, I feel at the beginning, because typically with a merger and acquisition, a deal team, an advisory team,
Mm-hmm.
would be the lawyer, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of legal compliance stuff,
Yep.
accountant, finance, all critical pieces. Like that,
Mm-hmm.
that's the known, hey, we need to get that group together.
Yep.
You may have the wealth management advisor if it's, middle market
Mm-hmm.
CEO, how are we thinking about this? And
Mm-hmm.
my goal is to make as part of standard operating procedure that you have a human capital advisor,
Mm-hmm.
someone in the room who says, okay, all of these numbers, you're working hard to have them make sense.
Mm-hmm.
We get that. That's the focus. Does this transaction make sense? Is the valuation, does that make sense? And I'll
Mm-hmm.
say, but none of these numbers make a difference, right? Deal success doesn't rest on the numbers. It rests on the people who are
Mm-hmm.
executing against the strategy that will deliver these numbers.
Right.
If you haven't factored that in, if you haven't assessed, is this leadership team the right leadership team to go from where we were to where we need to go? Just
Mm-hmm.
even that first question, right? Because you're
Yeah.
often evaluating the leadership team based on a static set of metrics. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
always say, but these metrics are changing automatically. That you're acquiring a company, you're merging with another company.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to change that dynamic. So you have to evaluate that.
Mm-hmm.
Say leadership. I'm not just talking your C-suite, right?
Right.
You both know that the real work gets done in the middle. And I
Yeah.
was in the C-suite, so this is not bastardizing the C-suite. You
Mm-hmm.
absolutely, it's critical to have that leadership,
Sure.
but to embrace and digest that new strategy and have it make sense to the front line, of
Mm-hmm.
the organization. Those are your middle managers. And so my role really at the beginning of the deal journey, if you will, is
Mm-hmm.
to highlight that people dynamic, the role that people play in
Mm-hmm.
executing for success.
Mm. Do you find that people are receptive to that message and
No.
that they
They are not. They are
no.
not.
So how do
I'm the
you
canary, I'm the canary in the coal mine.
get them eventually to listen and say, okay, let's work together and let's figure this thing that I don't want to talk about out?
You write a book like I
Nice.
did
Yeah.
that has a Spotify playlist attached to it and that
Mm-hmm.
has 10 different caricatures of the
Mm-hmm.
different types of personas who come to life.
Mm-hmm.
One of those is the dominatrix. I highlight that one in particular only because I think people are just fascinated by the fact that I go to more conferences where I think they invite me just because they want to know, why does this woman have a dominatrix on a cartoon board,
Yeah.
right? And that's the bully.
Mm.
Uh, and and I say upfront, like, these are caricatures intentionally. They are not gender specific. So I
Right.
could have drawn a bully too, but I had a DE and I friend of mine look at my cartoon characters
Ah.
and say, you need to make sure you skewer both genders equally. And so I turned my bully into a dominatrix, and there you are. So
Excellent.
it's been fascinating. She
Mm.
has gotten me into more rooms simply because people are like, okay, why? What's
Yeah.
with the dominatrix? And that person in particular in an M&A, not to go down this path too much, but
Mm-hmm.
can't say dominatrix and not explain what that's about.
Yes.
It is that person in the deal who has no compassion or empathy, who frankly, by the way, senior leadership loves, boards tend to love, because they're just about growth. Let's get this. But what can happen is they don't listen to other potential subject matter experts. They're just, these are the objectives. You're either on board or you're not. So you can see key talent.
Yeah.
Frankly, you burn people out very quickly. And so I'm always, particularly when I've spoken with boards, I'll always say to them, this is a very seductive personality because he or she is going to get the job done. But you have to also factor in the long-term consequences of this. You may lose key talent. And frankly, if you've got people who are just yes people, right, just taking orders and doing it and operating out of fear, you're not getting the best work out of them. So not only do they burn out, but you're not getting the best work. And so that's just one of the personalities. But back to your original question, I shouldn't say I used it. The inspiration for my book and why I wrote it was very personal. I just saw the human factor not being considered. And I thought if I wrote about it in a way that people could see, oh, but we can do this differently if we're just smarter about it. That's what I'm hoping will make people more receptive to the message.
Yeah. Yeah. Have some folks kind of heard that and said, okay, I'm going to pay attention to this.
Thankfully. And to be upfront, again, I thank my advertising career, and marketing. My illustrations are done by Jeff York, who I worked with in the early 90s. He was the head creative director at J. Walter Thompson in Chicago.
Oh, that's
still
awesome.
a friend of mine. And I will absolutely say this every time. My book is lovely, but his illustrations brought it to life in a way that I never could have. And I'm thankful that my advertising career made me see words and visuals together create the impact.
Yeah.
I wrote out great characters, but he made them real. And so I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, I totally get that. I've seen them, and I think the descriptions are great because they do start to bring that picture from like attention getting to, oh, I know that person.
Yes.
But you do get that attention with these different images. I mean, I think, I think there you've got the former rock star in there, and
he's one of my more popular ones. Everyone knows a former rock star, or it's like, ooh, I think that was me.
I mean, it's tough. I mean, I think probably certainly from a creative perspective, I think there's times where you feel that way, and it doesn't have to be a merger or an acquisition. It can just be like a slight shift in focus for the agency, and suddenly you're like, oh,
absolutely, yeah.
The thing I do isn't the thing we do anymore. What do I do? So I think you, in addition to your book really giving a good playbook for people to think about the human side of the M&A world, I think it just gives people fodder for thinking about how to survive through change, right? Because you can be at an agency that never gets acquired, never merges, but yet it feels like 5 different agencies over the course of 5 years.
Yeah.
That's leadership change, or that's just simply, I think, in advertising in particular, but most business, you're chasing something. You're chasing some new trend or something, and so you shift your focus. So do you ever find yourself providing guidance to folks who are not specifically in the M&A space, but are just dealing with some kind of transition?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Honestly, I did a TEDx talk back in 2022, and it was about that, just embracing uncertainty. What's funny for me is I hadn't realized, so embracing uncertainty, the idea first came to me just through my M&A, right? I was really struggling in the first M&A deal that I went through.
Yeah.
It was just, I had loved the company. It was a digital mapping company. So now maps are everywhere, right? But back in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was like a navigation device you could buy at Radio Shack, and it was on the bottom shelf, and it was $800, right? Or it was in someone's Mercedes, right? It was high-end. Now maps are everywhere.
Yep.
But I love the company, and we were creating something spectacular, and we were acquired by Nokia. And it threw me. They were B2C, we were B2B. I was convinced, and I think you'll appreciate this. I was convinced I just had to do the PowerPoint in a better way for them to understand the value that we had. Like I thought I could solve it through PowerPoint.
Of course.
I'm really good at PowerPoint and telling a story. I was like, no. You just, let me try again. Oh God, I just thinking about, all the ways that I just didn't get the message. It was like, no, let it go, lady. Like, you're now part of Nokia, the bigger mothership. And so I think what I have realized, though, in talking to other people, is a lot of the stuff that I talk about, this need to embrace uncertainty, isn't specific to mergers and acquisitions. We're facing uncertainty in general. And so it's why the TEDx talk became more about clarity on your value, right? Focusing on what you can control, which is your expertise, your value. So that's first and foremost. And then your effort and your attitude, right? I call it my TEA framework. It's just the more you focus on what you can control, which are your things, your talent, your effort, your attitude, then the uncertainty, the chaos around you is less disruptive, destabilizing, because you're clear on who you are and where you're going to put your energy. And I feel like I can't tell you how many times I need to remind myself, don't put your energy against something that you can't control. Like, you got to put it against those things that are important, right? So I go through a whole, series of 5 questions for you to help prioritize what's important. But I feel that I'm thankful, actually, that because of my book and the work that I do, I've had more people reach out to me, say, hey, a lot of your advice actually resonated with me. I'm a nurse. I've had nurses and teachers, people who I would never imagine my work would resonate with, that had just, it helped them get through. And I just remember one young lady who was a teacher saying, now you've helped me identify the person I'm working with as a dominatrix. And I was like, well, then like, here's what you got to do.
Oh God. Well, now that person has that mental image too, every time they see that person. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And what's the last point that I will make is it's allowed me to be a bit of a Nostradamus, which I never expected, because I've had many people describe someone that they're working with, and I'll say, oh, that's the Black Widow.
Yeah.
And he will say, well, how do you know? And I'll say, well, are they doing this? So in the case of the Black Widow, I'll say, are they acting friendly and asking you a lot of questions and getting knowledge from you? And I remember this one conversation in particular with the woman. She was like, yes. And she said, I feel like I'm suddenly not being invited to as many meetings as I used to be. And I said, oh, that you are definitely dealing with a Black Widow. I said, they're taking knowledge from you to make you expendable. Not trying to always paint some nefarious, everyone to get you. I just always want to be honest about when things are uncertain, you don't always see the best side of people. That's why the show Survivor was so popular.
Yeah.
Right? You see people do some pretty crazy things. So my goal is always just to prepare people and make them smart for how to navigate it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an interesting notion. I mean, human nature, it is what it is in some ways, and you have to be prepared for it. And I think on some level, you talk about the fact that this goes beyond mergers and acquisitions to just change and transitional things. And it's like, that's kind of the world we live in many ways. Like, I think that's what people feel. And in some ways, that's why I think people feel really disrupted, is because they're seeing some of these behaviors.
Yes.
They're noticing it probably in their fellow humans, and it's probably showing up in themselves, and they're maybe just trying to avoid the fact that they're doing it too.
Yeah.
And so, but I think the more people recognize and understand that, and then, as you point out in your book and elsewhere, what do you do with that information? If you know that somebody is kind of regressing into one of these personas, how do you best communicate with them, manage them, just deal with them, and hopefully get them back to the better version of themselves? I mean, is that part of the work you do, is thinking of
Absolutely.
how do you take these folks and elevate them back up to their best selves?
Yeah. And it's why in the book I highlight, and not everyone who's listening will have read the book, so don't worry. The highlight is these are personas that ideally you aren't going to be permanently, and more often it's just a moment in time. And to steal from Mahatma Gandhi, right? My whole goal is be the change you wish to see. To me, critical to, frankly, even desuckifying work is modeling the behavior that you want to see more of.
Yes.
So, I've been invited to a lot of, women in business, women in different things, even graduate school, how to enter the workforce. And I'll say, don't assume all leaders know everything. You need to role model the behavior you want to see in others. And you can be a leader at any stage in your career. You role model leadership behavior. And for me, it was a lesson learned in my merger and acquisition experience, but to me, it transcends life in general, right? Don't fold your arms and say, well, this is the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
I gave up a really successful 25-year in corporate marketing to start all over again. And I would say not even at zero, like at -10. I had no business being an M&A, right?
Yeah.
I wasn't very good at math.
Yeah.
So, but I thought there's got to be a better way to do M&A. And so that was my little mission. But I think all of us have that opportunity. And it doesn't, you have to give things up. It's just modeling the behavior you want to see. And the more you do that, I have found the more other people go, oh, I mean, there's a different way to do this.
Yeah.
Okay. It's one step at a time, but we all play a role in it. So you can't always assume that people above you are going to do what you want. You need to role model. Okay, here's what I'm looking for. This is what this should be. That's how we should do it. And I've seen more, I'll say this for younger people in particular, younger people doing that. And when I say younger, we're just talking, you've just entered the workforce.
Yeah.
You have an opportunity to be a leader as well, right from the get-go.
Yeah. And I actually feel like younger people get this in some ways better than those of us who are a little bit older, because I think they're just not willing to accept like the way things are. It's like, I think I think young people have gone through a lot growing up, and they show up and they go, no, I'm not tolerating stuff. And so some of them do show up like, this is how I want to be. And you got to kind of get in line. And I think there's a lot of value in that. And it also comes back to like that notion of what you said, what you can control, your talent, your effort, and your attitude. And I think showing up with the best version of that is a great model. And I also thought, as you were talking about the ability to deal with change and all that, like that's part of your talent. Like, that becomes part of your skill set. Is, I think I saw somewhere that, CEOs, what are you looking for? And one of them was something along the lines of adaptability or ability to deal with change, because that's just the world we're in now. So if you can show up and have that in your toolkit, not only are you modeling that behavior, but you've got people who are a little further up the chain, they're looking down and going, one, I need that. And two, oh yeah, I used to be able to do that. And it kind of knocks you out of your stupor of being kind of swallowed by the sense of change and fear, and moving into the better version of your own self. So I think it kind of works in both directions in that way.
And honestly, I mean, I'm going to be upfront. I sound like someone who's a smoker who's now a non-smoker, but I hated change. That acquisition. And I like going back to my PowerPoints. I just kept thinking, no, we know mapping, we know digital mapping. Let us keep doing this the way we've been doing it. Right now, some of that was valid.
Yep.
Right. I think they saw us as a line item. We want to get our maps at this amount of money, and it's not like, no, mapping can completely change the dynamic, right? Like what's playing out now with mapping is exactly what Navtech saw. And so I feel so privileged to have been part of that company.
Yeah.
Maps was just kind of at the beginning. And now Maps, I mean, you don't realize Maps powers Uber, Uber was going to buy Navtech, right? Like Maps, GPS, where, your ability on Peloton to ride the Tour de France. Again, it's all mapping data. So to know the power of mapping, I was so excited. And I was like, you guys, we are not a line item.
Right.
Again, I was resistant to the change. And so now my goal is I focus on M&A, but I'm just always, I'm coaching and consulting on just how do you adapt? How do you pivot? And I go back to every time you got to be crystal clear on your value. And if you feel you're deficient, right, you got to knowledge, get curious, keep learning, be smart, train yourself, take all the training and development, learning and development opportunities that you have at work that you can. Because the more skill sets you have, the clearer you are on what you're really good at. And that is just so critical to navigating the uncertainty that we're just going to face perpetually.
Yeah. It's funny. You're talking about, working in advertising, and there's been a fairly big merger in the advertising space, VML merging with Wunderman Thompson, which Wunderman Thompson was formed by a merger of Wunderman.
Walter Thompson and Wunderman. Oh yeah, trust me. I was like, I feel like M&A has been throughout my life. I was like, I was an advertising, and they all went through.
So, I think it's interesting because I think in advertising, even though most of us are all about big ideas and things that are new, I also think there's a lot of resistance to change because it's hard work coming up with new ideas and doing that. And if something comes in to disrupt that, it feels like, oh my God,
right,
I'm going to fail. And if I fail, then I'm useless. So you've got this kind of big coming together, high level stuff happening in an ad agency. Like if you're coaching somebody who's middle manager or even just kind of a rising, going from individual contributor to manager level, how do you give them hope and some sense that they aren't just kind of a pinball bouncing around, without any ability to impact their direction? What would be some of maybe the top few things you would offer to them as a way to give them some hope and some sense of control over the future?
Well, I think there's two thoughts that come to mind. One is what to do and then control over the future. But on the what to do, and frankly, it's funny. I think it's why I got along with the creatives when I was in advertising. Is taking care of the minutia, the administrative stuff, to give them white space, right? To just think big thoughts, to get out of all the chaos around you. And so I feel like, particularly with when I'm speaking at the college level, I'm saying you need to create white space for yourself. No one will give that to you. And I get the allure of social media, but the pull of that robs you of the white space that you need to create that's where your big ideas come from. This second chapter of my career came from creating white space. I had gone through my third multi-billion-dollar acquisition. I was actually in the process of interviewing for my next CMO role, but I was writing this book. And the space I started to create with the book, coupled with like interviews from CEOs who said, like, this book is really good. Like, you've got to do more around the book. But the whole book idea, like coming up with a Spotify playlist and 10 caricatures
Yeah.
because I had to just think differently, and that wasn't
Mhm.
going to come by being bombarded by all the outside noise. So I'd say
Mm.
first and foremost is no one's going to give you white space. You got to create it.
Mm.
And that's not just for your health and wellness. You definitely need
Mhm.
it for that, but that's where creativity comes.
Yeah, I agree.
Martin Lindstrom, who I know and love, talks a lot about the fact that people are no longer bored because
Mm.
they're always on their phone.
Yeah.
Right? And boredom is where a lot of innovation happens. It's where a lot of creativity comes from. And
Mhm.
give yourself the chance to be bored. I
Yeah,
that would be my first piece of advice.
I know. It's funny because I think that almost terrifies some people because we've gotten so good at just shoving that away with whatever it is, whether it's our phones or playing games or whatever we can do, or one of the millions of streaming services we can watch. It's like, um,
Yeah.
yeah, you forget that, like, yeah, you used to just sometimes be sitting around like, I don't know what to do. And that's like, yeah, that is where suddenly your brain sort of just goes in different directions because it's like it's in search of something
Right.
to kind of stimulate it and fill it up versus just the mindlessness of the scroll.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the other part answer to that, I think we've already touched on a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like how to think about the future. I'm always reminding people you have more in your control than you think.
Mm.
And if you sit back, and I'm definitely a Miss Growth mindset
Yeah.
versus fixed mindset.
Yeah.
Carol Dweck, love her.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Carol Dweck is the one who defined, there's growth mindset folks and fixed mindset.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been a growth mindset.
Yeah.
Sit back and wait for someone else to do it. If I see something that I think should be done. And by the way, I test it with others. And
Mm-hmm.
if there's a majority who say, yeah, you're right, we should fix this. This could be
Mm-hmm.
done better. In the case of M&A, now they're coming out of the woodwork to say, I think you're onto something, Jennifer. Like there doesn't have to be a 70 to 90% failure rate in M&A. Maybe if we
Wow.
actually paid attention to the stuff you talk about, this could be better.
That's
But to
crazy.
me, that's the other aspect. There's more in
Mm-hmm.
control than you think, and
Yeah.
it's about how you think about that and approach
Mm-hmm.
it. And going back to one of the themes that we've hit on here, role model the behavior you wish to see. Don't
Mm.
wait for others to give it to you. Start being the change.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's great advice. It almost like on some level, I'm like, well, of course, but I think the combination of um, whether it's in a merger and acquisition setting or just the sort of constant pace of change, like you talked about before, our less than best selves start to creep into the equation,
Yes.
and that can kind of blind us to that growth mindset part of us, and
Mhm.
suddenly you're stuck. And so just like, whatever you can do to give yourself reminders of like who I truly am is somebody who believes I can impact my future and I can do things that will affect the way I show up in the world and ultimately affect the way my environment actually can change around that. Like you almost have to give yourself my brain is going to just simple like post-its, but it's whatever you can do to just kind of go like something that can smack you out of it when we inevitably slip into whatever caricature we slip into when things get a little bit crazy.
Well, here's an example that comes to mind. So the third acquisition that I went
Mhm.
through, I had a number of people say, "Wow, you seem awfully calm." I was like, "Oh,
Mhm.
I know how this is going to play out.
Uh-huh.
I've been to this rodeo."
Exactly.
And so I was let go, and
Mhm.
I figured it was inevitable,
Yeah.
right? I recognized because I was about to launch a product that we had to shelve because of the acquisition, right? The
Hmm.
had been hired as the CMO was to launch this product, and like two
Right.
weeks before, Jennifer, you know that product? Well, hey, we're being acquired. And I remember, um, the typical when someone's let go, people act funny at the office. It's
Hmm.
just, and I said, no, that is not going to be my narrative.
Hmm.
So I did a presentation, to help people understand, hey, here's where we were. This is where I see the opportunities are. I was
Mm-hmm.
on every call. I transitioned my knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
People who like in the kitchen area would like, hang their head.
Yeah.
I'd be like, hey, Bob, and I thought, and it was funny because then, the final week, people were completely different. Like they were chatty with me. They invited me even to more meetings where typically I had no reason to be there. And
Mm-hmm.
so I say, like, that's a perfect example, right? When you've been let go, it
Mm-hmm.
can be like, the scorched earth policy, or I say take the high road and act like, you know what? This has been a great company. I have done great service for this company, and I deserve to be treated with respect, and I'm going to respect the company as well. And
Mm-hmm.
off I go. Good luck, bless you.
Yeah.
It was a disastrous couple months after I left, and I knew that was going to happen, but
Yeah.
you know what? I just like that to me is a perfect scenario where typically people are like, oh, when you're let go and it's just
Mm-hmm.
awful. Like, you know what? I would have been the person like if they had to walk me out, I'd have been with my box and my ruler. I'd have been handing out like, hey, do you need this stapler? Like
Yeah.
just own your own story.
Mm. I love that. And I think like when you do that, like you said, you're now giving people a different model of how to behave in that situation, or again, any disruptive situation. But it also, one of the things that shows up when you're talking about, particularly I think in mergers and acquisitions, but we have such an identity attached to our work and our job. Um,
Absolutely.
and I think, like I think people say, like, if you can loosely hold your identity, that's good. Like you get a little something, a little juice out of that. But if you are so attached, not even just to your job, but to the place where you do your job, then of course, if somebody says you no
Yeah.
longer have that, yeah, it's an absolute assault on you.
Oh, absolutely.
You
And
know.
and frankly, it's why the through line of my book and the work that I do, so even the talks that I give, the headline is know your value. And
Mm,
that was a really hard thing for me
yeah.
to appreciate because exactly I identified, particularly with NAVTech. It's why I
Hmm.
was devastated
Yeah.
with all the work that I had done and I
Hmm.
identified with, right? I I had an amazing boss. We built up, great go-to-market strategies around the world. And
Hmm.
suddenly to have that be assassinated, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And deconstructed, I was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
that's my work.
Yeah.
And so it took me a while to recognize that knowing your value, don't get attached to the title and that, your identity is understanding you, your
Hmm.
expertise and what you bring to each thing that you do.
Yeah.
And exactly as you said, you have to decouple. You can bring that to the company, but you got to
Hmm.
be crystal clear on what that is that you bring. And
Hmm.
just on that, I think it's why that scene in You've Got Mail with Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks, right?
Yeah.
Where like it's nothing personal, it's just business.
Hmm.
And her comment is, "What are you talking about? It's always personal, right?"
Right.
The thing you want out of your employees is that they treat the job as though it's their own. It
Hmm.
is personal for them. That's when you get the best work out of employees. So then when you
Yeah.
take it away and you say, that
Yeah.
was good then, not now, it's you've pulled the rug out from under people. And so
Hmm.
I say that was a big journey for me was to realize my identity had to be something that I own based on the
Hmm.
value I bring.
Yeah.
That's, understanding what again, I go back to what's your talent, and
Hmm.
you put your effort and how do you keep a positive attitude?
Yeah, I think that's a big, important shift that is probably more important than ever because it's getting more and more clear that people are less tightly attached to any company at any given time because of all the possible ways that things can be disrupted because of the increase in the gig economy, freelance, consulting, fractional, all this stuff. It's like we're going to move around. So how do we build a stable identity that we can take with us and pour completely into whatever we're doing, but know
Yeah.
that when the time comes, when that ends, because it's almost inevitably going to end, that we can then put it all back on, carry it somewhere else, and hopefully have it built up even stronger because we've learned and grown through the process rather than feeling like like you said, we've been assassinated. Our identity has just been
Yeah,
vaporized. I think that's hard work. I mean, I don't want to pretend it's easy, but it
it
seems like the
isn't.
only way through in this world where we're in right now.
Yeah. And uh yeah. And it's why, to quote from Taylor Swift.
Of course.
Oh, swear to God, I won't be surprised if someone says, "So, are you thinking of running for president at some time?" Dwayne the Rock Johnson has already revealed that he was approached for that, which just makes.
Nice. Yeah.
But it's betting on you.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I think going back to the concept that we talked about earlier, this embracing uncertainty.
Hmm.
You can embrace uncertainty when you're clear on who you are and what you offer and what your value is, and betting on you. Um,
Hmm.
she's I mean, she started her journey at like 20 when she was 14.
Yeah.
And so she's been doing it 20 years.
Yeah.
And I thought that people need to feel comfortable to bet on themselves.
Yeah. I think for whatever reason, we don't inherently feel that comfort. I can't even begin to understand. There's so many probably psychological processes that are layering on there that create that feeling. But I agree. I
Well,
think
it's exactly as you said. We identify with the job that we do. So
yeah.
the company defines us, and that has been the case. I
Yeah.
absolutely,
Hmm.
that was all my philosophy. Like that's why I made the joke about now I'm a non-smoker. So I'm like, no,
Yeah.
no, no. You define your identity.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that analogy. One of the other things that shows up in the merger and acquisition space that is related to a lot of what I like to pay attention to is the culture
Mhm.
equation, right? I mean, you know, whether it's VML and Wonderman Thompson or whomever, like there's cultures established, whether those companies actively establish them or not. There are
Right.
cultures there. And do you find like are people aware of that? Do they pay attention to that any more than anything? And when if they do, what are they doing or what are you helping them do to to make sure that that becomes an additive process rather than either a stagnant or even worse, a subtractive process, right? Because I feel like culture can be 1 + 1 = 3. It can be 1 + 1 = 2, maybe, or it could be 1 + 1 = 0, where
Right.
you just and then both of the cultures just die. So
Yeah.
how do you help people navigate that? That's a tough one, I would think.
Oh, absolutely. And it's fascinating to me. So I had left Foot Cone and Belding before its merger with Draft, but
Mm,
yeah, I mean, you anybody in advertising knows what a disaster that was, right?
yes.
And that
Yeah.
was purely culture driven.
Hmm. Yeah.
Draft having been considered below the line
Hmm.
advertising, and
Yeah.
FCB above the line advertising. Like, talk about two very different
Two
cultures.
different worlds. Yeah.
And in M&A, I would say it is recognized that culture influences the deal dynamic.
Hmm.
Where I see the issue is that it's often relegated to, let's just get the deal done and we'll take care of it afterwards.
Mm,
The senior leadership has met from both sides. We get along, we share the
mm,
same values. We had a steak dinner, we chatted way into the night. This is going to be great. That is
yeah.
not how to assess culture.
Right.
It just isn't. And so a
Hmm.
lot of the work that I do, frankly, it includes those great steak dinners.
Hmm.
That then you get into the work and
Hmm.
things start to fall apart and
Hmm.
talent starts to leave.
Yeah.
And I absolutely, I've done culture assessment. I've worked on culture integration. Uh,
Hmm.
if you haven't picked up by now, I'm an analogy lady.
Yeah. I like it. Yeah.
So the the way I help senior executives and frontline leaders think about it is I'll say, okay, let's equate this to, you are a tourist. You are going to a foreign country, right? Let's
Hmm.
We're gonna go to Italy.
Hmm.
Think about what's gonna prepare you for that trip. You don't know the language, you don't know the people,
Hmm.
right? So what are some of the things you might do? You'll research it. Maybe you'll buy a book.
Hmm.
Key phrases in Italian.
Yeah.
You'll ask people. who went to Italy. Where should we go? Where should we stay?
Yeah.
I say, you need to take that same mindset as a company. There's country culture, has the same dynamics as company culture. You need to think like a tourist.
Yeah.
Be curious. You need to want to learn about each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
You think Italians are really going to appreciate you as a tourist if you say, well, that's not how we do it in the US, right? That's why a lot of French people hate Americans, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, garçon, they don't learn the language, they don't try. And I
Yeah.
say, so you got to think the same way where you've had amazing, and I always have that, well, we went to Italy and we had a great time because we learned some key phrases. We researched. I said, you got to have the same mentality.
Yeah.
You all have acronyms. Learn each other's language. And oh, by the way, teach each other the language. Same to the tourist, right? The more you learn the little phrase in French, où est la toilette?
Yeah.
So for me, that's where I'd say the greatest epiphanies. It's not just, assessments and the 25 questions, and then how do we work together, and what box are you in the 4 box? Make it simple. I say, think like a tourist.
Yeah. I wonder do people, because you talked about the failure rate, which kind of just blows my mind, the 70 to 90% failure rate of mergers and acquisitions. And I think, I don't know what percentage of that is related to the culture equation, but it's probably a good chunk is just, like you said, with draft and FCB.
It's usually, you've had so many different studies, but typically culture's in the top 3.
Yeah.
Right? There's the inflated valuation, because the lack of success means that by year 1, they did not hit the valuation that was, the reason why they did the deal in the first place. And there's a number of variables for that. So culture is just one part of it, but overestimated valuation, efficiencies, right? A lot of particularly multi-billion-dollar M&A deals are for efficiencies, and they don't gain the efficiencies. It's not considered a success.
Yeah.
And you and I both know what looks good on paper can be very hard to execute.
Yeah.
But culture typically is always up there in the top 3 or 5 reasons for why the deal didn't go well. But what I'd say is the through line throughout is just human behavior.
Yeah.
You can have forecasts and metrics and grids and templates that all say this is what's going to be achieved. It's really an unknown until people start doing the work. And so that's the role I'm trying to play, is prepare those leadership and frontline leaders to be better prepared, to give a better chance for success.
Yeah, I think that human thing is just, again, it's like one of these soft, quote unquote, metrics that it feels like it's the wild card in everything, right? Great plans, can quickly fall apart because you just didn't think about the people that are coming together to execute that plan, whether it's a merger, an acquisition, or some new product launch or whatever. If you're not thinking about how people can feel empowered to actually support whatever you're trying to have them support, you're kind of doomed. And it sort of continues to sort of blow my mind how that gets ignored so frequently. And I think it seems like, at least from your world of M&A, certainly you're starting to open some eyes, right? And I think it's like, that's part of this desuckifying process to me, is to just start opening people's eyes to realize there's more to this than what we show on a business plan. Like, people have to actually live in this, and if you pay more attention to that, then the suck starts to go away, and you're not so blindsided as a leader. Like, well, why didn't that go? It looked good on paper. It's like, well, I think we could have told you why it wouldn't go, but you didn't want to talk about the people side of it,
And I'm using every tool in my advertising and marketing toolkit to get people to pay attention. Pay attention to me, like to be the canary in the coal mine who doesn't die.
Yeah.
But do people go, oh, maybe there's something toxic in the coal mine?
Yeah.
because it's status quo isn't working,
Mm-hmm.
and find that status quo isn't working. It just takes some people being courageous to say, "Oh, there's a better way.
Yeah.
We can do this better."
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm playing my small part in desuckifying the M&A part.
Well, I think it's really important, and like I said, I think we've talked about how it definitely extends even beyond that, and there's a lot of learning. And so whether people, read your book or listen to you speak, I think they'll get a lot of good information that's relevant no matter where you are in your journey
Thank
as
you.
a business. And I think when speaking is a big part of what you do. Who are you currently speaking to? And if you had to pick sort of one audience that you're not speaking to that you would love to speak to, who is that?
Oh, I'd like to talk to everybody.
I get that.
Not just on the M&A part, but just like the need to embrace uncertainty. I feel like I'm the convert who now wants to bring people into this religion.
Absolutely.
You just got to embrace it.
Yeah.
The more you put your energy into just embracing the uncertainty and punching through instead of, your energy going towards, can't we just keep it the way it was?
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you say that, because I'd say for me, 2024 is going to be a pivotal year. In the past, I have spoken at a lot of M&A conferences. I bet you didn't know that was a thing, right?
I don't think I really did until I started researching for this discussion.
And there, understandably, I just wanted to show there's a different way. Like, consider human capital. An advisor doesn't have to be me. There's a lot of great human capital advisors out there, but they need to be a part of your advisory team. And so I did a lot of speaking there. I'd say the TEDx talk opened my eyes to a bigger audience for me, which is pure joy for me. The concept of, so how do you embrace uncertainty? So, I'm a marketing and advertising gal, so I've spoken at marketing conferences. I'm hoping to do more of that, particularly CMOs and their marketing teams.
Yeah.
It is. You're riding the uncertainty bronco. And so for me, it's, and I can speak that language. So here's how to think about that from a marketing standpoint. But honestly, it was kind of tongue in cheek, but really, healthcare, financial services, I can't think of an industry right now that isn't dealing with the dynamics of uncertainty. And so, I'm excited to expand my message to a broader audience, that, as you graciously reminding me and the listeners too, is my message goes beyond just M&A. It's about, how do you embrace that uncertainty? What's it take? And what's the goal in doing it? But what's the reward, right? And what I say, it's in my title, embrace uncertainty, create opportunity. It'll come. You just gotta lean in and embrace it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I certainly think ad agencies could benefit from you speaking there, because I think,
well, we can all have a good cry together.
Oh my God. Yeah. There's just so much like disruption in that space right now. And I think in advertising, maybe a little more than other industries, because it's just filled with like deeply empathetic people that are craving the human side of this. And they're feeling like that's being stripped away in many ways. So if somebody shows up with a message of hope and a message that says, oh, there's things I can actually do, no matter where I sit in the organization, to step into that hope.
Right.
And to feel like, oh, I don't have to just sit back and watch this industry that I love feel like it's slipping away from me. Right. I can model the behavior. If I'm in a more leadership position, not only can I model the behavior, but I can impact the way I think about the people side of the equation and do better there.
Well, because it's advertising 101, right? We know, as successful advertisers, it's the head and the heart.
Yes.
Right? Functional benefits, always good. Doesn't mean anything if you haven't connected with people emotionally. We know that. So I would say, again, that's why I'm so thankful for that lesson early in my career, because it applies to life as well. And the heart. You got to get them both.
I fully agree with that. I think we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but a question I do like to ask is, if you could wave a magic wand and just make the world of work fully desuckified, what does that look like to you?
It's funny because it's kind of been my manifesto from the beginning. It's rediscovering the humanity in business.
Mm,
And for me, desuckifying work is that remembering
mm,
our humanity. I
love that.
did a talk, I think this is back in 2018.
Mhm,
Disrupt HR was really big, and you had like
mhm,
5-minute things. And my whole talk, and it's funny going back to it, my whole message was, do not be a robot.
mm,
Right. And this whole wave of AI and robots, and I feel like we're competing with robots. We're trying to like prove that we're better than robots. I was
right.
like, stop.
Yeah.
Remind people of what humanity in business looks
Hmm.
like,
Yeah.
right? By being an empathetic, compassionate boss, by understanding, by meeting
Hmm.
people where they are, like
Yeah.
meeting clients where they are. Like, so
Hmm.
for me, that if I were to wave a magic wand, it would be that everyone believes what I believe, right? We need to rediscover our humanity in business and
Hmm.
make that what we're our lead in to
Mm,
our conversations, to how we engage with people at work.
hmm.
It sounds very highfalutin,
Yeah.
but I do think it's possible.
I fully agree, and I love that notion of like, stop trying to beat the robots at their game. We play a different game, and it's one that the robots can't play.
Yes.
Like, let's just continue to expand that side of us, and let the robots deal with the stuff that's not really our game anyway. You
Yeah.
know.
There's one line that I remember from that talk that always got a laugh. And I remember saying, because Alexa and Siri always have time for you, right? I noted we don't make time for each other because we're trying to be
Yeah.
more.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So here we're letting robots, in this case,
Mm-hmm.
Siri,
Yeah.
you just chat with them and they'll always answer you, right? Well,
Mm-hmm.
how about like, let's show the human side, make time for other people.
Mm-hmm.
How are they doing?
Yeah.
Actually, and listen for the answer.
Mm.
Make that good. Hey, good morning. How are
Mm.
you? You know,
Yeah. The simple.
good morning. How are you? But then you just keep going. Like you
Yeah.
don't even actually really care what the person's answer is. So the little things that show our humanity.
Yeah, I love that. The simple stuff like the good mornings and the thank yous, like those small doses of humanity, though, but they're felt throughout the day. Somebody shows up into your office or even just gives you a message of good morning if you're working virtually, and then maybe throws another little thank you for doing that thing at 2 p.m. or whatever. It's like it's amazing how differently you walk away from your computer at the end of the day having those kind of interactions versus it just being like task, 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 task. Good
Right.
night. You know?
But again, we all are responsible. So
Yeah.
stop the
So
rope.
step into it ourselves and create some contagion. Yeah. Well, one other thing I always like to ask is I'm big on the sound effects with my show, and I create goofy sounds of
Oh,
cats and other stuff.
ask me for a sound effect.
And I know if you're up for it, do you have a sound effect that we
I
can throw into
I
the mix here?
I will give you my bell.
Yeah.
And insert it, but I'll highlight why I actually do have a sound effect. And I'm
Cool.
just so glad you asked.
Nice.
And it's the theme of, I feel like, our conversation.
Mm-hmm.
The talks that I give is about knowing your value.
Mm.
And I highlight the analogy that I use there is or not even analogy, excuse me, metaphor. Ooh,
Mm-hmm.
the English teacher would be
I
doing.
like it.
Uh, I talk about, so it's like, consider your value as a number that's floating over your head, like,
Mm.
and that this value would change depending on the situation and who you're talking to and where
Mm.
you are in the grocery store, in your office, in your house.
Mm-hmm.
I have a little ding that goes off uh, that I then use throughout the speech to just kind of remind you that your value should be a number you own. That
Mm.
number shouldn't change depending on who you're in front of or where you are in the grocery
Mm-hmm.
store or in your office, that it's a number you need to control or at least be clear on.
Mm.
And I use the ding as the way to just remind people that your value is something you own and determine, and clear on what it is.
Oh, I love that, because not only it's a fun sound effect, but also as you were describing, like going to the grocery store, talking to this person, I could already picture me allowing that value to go down in situations where I'm less comfortable or feel like I bring less value to the equation. And it's like, why am I letting
Right.
where I show up dictate how I feel about the value I bring? That's ridiculous. So it's a wonderful reminder.
Well, a good laugh line is, and I'll say, and your value, come on, how many of us know that our value is like less than zero and we're talking to our kids? Mom, you don't know anything. Right? So, so that always gets a good laugh line, because people are like, oh yeah, my teenagers probably have 10.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I don't have kids, but I can only imagine if you deal with a teenager for a frequent amount of time, that you probably need like a good little meditation session before you go to try to impact the world in some way, because otherwise you'll just show up like, I got nothing.
Yes. So I will send you my ding. You can add it in.
I am looking forward to it. I heard you made it and it showed up kind of nicely. The sound traveled actually when you made it. So we may use the organic or the one you send, or both. Well, the last thing I always like to ask, obviously, is just how can people find you online? If you want to give people the title of your book and how they can find that, all that good stuff. So how do people get to know you better?
So title of my book is Now What? Which frankly is what I felt like I was saying half the time somebody came into my office during the various deals.
I can imagine.
Now What? A Survivor's Guide for Thriving Through Mergers and Acquisitions. As you rightly noted, it's a good manual. A good survivor's guide just for transition and change in general. To say it's continues to be a bestseller on Amazon. So
awesome.
You can find it there. There's a couple of other Now What books. So just put Now What Fondrevay in the book.
All right.
Pop up.
Okay.
And frankly, I try and keep it simple. So you can find me on jenniferjfondrevay.com.
Okay.
I have my initial in there, not because there's any other Jennifer J. Fondrevay out there.
Yeah.
I love alliteration. Jennifer J. Fondrevay.
Yeah, it's fun to say.
My advertising day is coming back.
Yeah.
Actually, I am on LinkedIn a ton.
Awesome.
Don't just about M&A. I provide advice and counsel, and I don't do a newsletter. So anybody who's petrified that anything with me now, like twice a month, you're going to get something from me. I don't.
Nice.
All of my philosophy and bits of wisdom I pour out onto LinkedIn in comments, and happy to say, I seem to have a rabid following of people who like what I put out.
Oh, that's awesome. And I've now got the beginnings of a Jennifer J. Fondrevay jingle forming in my head. I feel like that's the next step. And then the ding happens at the end of it.
It should be a song. You're right.
It feels like it. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's giving me hope, as we sit through this constant state of change in the world. And it's got me thinking about 2024 in particular, and the idea that I think after coming through all of the suck of 2023, people are ready for something better. And I think what you're providing is not only hope, but tools to do it. Like, step into it, do the things that you can do to model the kind of behavior you want to see. Yeah. And then the dominoes are going to start to fall. That's really the only way we get into this better position this year, is if people start doing that. So I love that it's not just sort of that 30,000 foot message, but you're giving people some ability to activate it and be a part of the move to making 2024 a lot less sucky than 2023 was.
Thank you. I try.
Yeah.
I really do. To me, you can't just sit back and complain. You got to do something about it. So
yeah, I'm with you.
2024 as well.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. And with that, I will say goodbye and good luck with everything you're doing this year.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the DesuckifyWork Podcast. And thanks to Jennifer for bringing joy, hope, and possibility to our conversation.
Ding.
You can follow Jennifer on LinkedIn and check out her site at jenniferjfondrevay.com. You should also check out her book, Now What? A Survival Guide for Thriving Through Mergers and Acquisitions. It's a delightfully human take on a frequently inhumane topic. Speaking of delight, I think my website is pretty groovy too. Check it out at thepuddingfactory.net. If you'd like to learn more about the work I do, please drop me a note and we'll set up a free half-hour What the Heck is Coaching All About session. Hope to hear from you soon. Bye, everyone.